And welcome back, everybody, to the Podcaster Nation. That's right. I said welcome back because I know you were just listening to our stuff and you came back because you wanted more. Well, folks, that was brilliant because we have a lot more for you. Now, why do we have so much for you, more for you? Because this is the podcast that's about podcasters, it's for podcasters, and it's done by podcasters. And our guest today, you crack the code, is a podcaster. That's right. So, folks, this is the place where we all come together to raise each other up, and this is the place where the rising tide raises all ships. Let's get sailing with our guest today. Please welcome to the show the host of Leaders and Legacies podcast, Craig Andrews. Craig, how you doing today, brother?
I'm doing great, Rory. Thanks for having me.
No, I appreciate you coming on, man. You've been through it, man. I mean, your story is nothing short of incredible. We got to talk about it just briefly, in the pre-interview, and I mean, my goodness, I cannot believe what you've been through. Um, as we get started here, before we start unpacking everything, why don't you just let everybody know who is Craig Andrews? What are you about, and maybe a little bit about what you've been through.
Yeah. I've taken anything but a straight path through life. I when I was in high school, nobody ever accused me of being a model student. So I joined the Marine Corps and met my first great sales guy who signed me up for 6 years rather than the three I was aiming for. And the Marines was amazing. One of the best experiences of my life. Great brotherhood. And it also helped me kind of get squared away in life. And it's kind of wild. I thought, I want to build things. I was good at math. I thought, who builds things? Engineers build things. So I go to engineering school. I saw you just tip your U of I cup. I actually visited Purdue. That was one of the schools I was thinking
Ah,
about, but they didn't take transfer students. So when I was in the Marines, I had to start going to community college to get my grades back up to something where somebody thought maybe might be able to make it in their program. But anyway, I got a couple engineering degrees and discovered that engineering is not a field that rewards creativity. Um,
no.
I was like, well, crap. I mean, I did well. I did great in school and I was doing well. And I had a really cool job. I was designing mobile phones in the 90s. And, most electrical engineers aren't design engineers. So it was a coveted job. It was a great position. And I was doing well. I was just not happy. And so I thought, well, what should I do? And I ended up moving over to marketing. And so I marketed semiconductors for mobile phones for about a decade. And that was a blast. It was a lot of work, but it was a blast. And but like a lot of things, there's a lot of price pressure for them to get that mobile phone in your hands for the price they do. There's a lot of pressure on the suppliers. And I knew the day would come when they'd ask me to fly coach to Asia. And I'm like, and that day came, and I'd already made my plans. I'm like, I'm punching out. No way am I going to Asia 4 or 5 times a year in the back of the plane. It's brutal. And so I started my own marketing agency, and I'd done really well in mobile phones. And I thought, well, hey, I'll share my wisdom with others. And it was funny. As I've run into guys from my old life, they'd ask me, hey, what have you been up to? And I said, I've spent the last 10 years learning how little I know about marketing. And it's true. And I just realized, there's a part of me that kind of wishes I could go back and use some of the things that I learned because they use so few tools of really powerful marketing. But I mean, there were some things that, at least in that world, I pioneered that, you know, most marketers get in the regular world. But it's been a really, really neat journey. And the, coming up right on 4 years ago, July 31st, 2021, my wife and I both woke up and we were just sick. I mean, horribly, horribly sick. Could barely move, could barely talk, kind of sick. And um, and just drug on and on and on. And about 10 days later, I end up walking into the emergency room and I walk up to the desk. My wife dropped me off at the door. I walk up to the desk and I have to say it in multiple breaths. I'm like, I'm having trouble breathing. And they immediately pull me behind the curtain, put me on oxygen. My wife comes back in. She says, "Hey, where's my husband?" They said, "We have him. You need to leave," because they weren't letting family in the hospital back then.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I didn't know it at the time, but that would be the last time I'd see my wife for about 2 months. She'd see me in another couple weeks. But they put me on the ventilator. They called her in the middle of the night on August 22nd, early in the morning of August 22nd, woke her up and honestly, they bullied her to put me on the ventilator, and then told her I was going to die.
Wow.
And and they said you can't visit, and she's like, no, if he's going to die, he's not going to die alone. And so she got permission to spend 10 minutes a day, or not 10 minutes, 1 hour a day with me in the hospital. And so she come in my room, they'd make her gown up. I have a picture. I mean, she looks like a surgeon. She's got the gloves on and has the gown on. Of course, she had exactly the same thing I had, but they made her do all that. And but she'd come in, she'd sing to me and she'd pray over me and she'd say words of encouragement. And I actually heard her in my coma. I've
Wow.
repeated back to her word for word things that she told me in the coma. And about 6 weeks later, I started waking up, um, trying to figure out what was going on. Nobody bothered to tell me that they'd moved me from Austin to San Antonio. So I remember the day I heard I had a trach at that point. And when you have a trach, you
Oh,
can't talk.
yeah.
And so communication was real hard. And I remember one day I heard her on the phone giving directions to a friend that was coming by to visit. And as I heard the directions, I'm like, oh, I'm in San Antonio. That was the first time I realized I wasn't in Austin.
That's insane. So everybody thinks you're in a coma. Nobody thinks you can hear anything, and you're just sort of. It sounds like you're pretty conscious.
It's, it's, yeah, it's weird. Very active mental state. The dreams, the dreams were kind of on a spectrum. So my early dreams, very, very disconnected from reality. So in my dreams, I was driving Michael Jordan's Ferrari. Um, Almost got arrested for grand theft auto for joyriding a Bentley. And, um, but then as the dreams progressed, bits of reality started sneaking in. And, right before I woke up, the dreams were almost indistinguishable from reality.
Wow.
Yeah.
I, the whole COVID, aspect to all that, in terms of how you could even have people around you and everything else. When I was, researching, and reading your story, you had people around you all day long preparing for you to not be here anymore, and your wife was the only voice. Is that what
Yeah.
I'm getting? Saying no, you're going to be fine. You're coming back.
Well, she didn't say that, but, uh,
You
but,
better come back.
well, one thing she did say, she came in, she put her hand on my left shoulder, and and it turns out left right makes a lot of difference in terms of remembering where she was in my dreams on different days because she was on different sides. But she put her hand on my left shoulder and said, "Craig, this is Karen. I'm your wife. It's going to be okay." I suspect that was one of the later dreams where they started having a little bit more hope that it was going to be okay. She'd probably been talking to me about what it was going to be like to recover because that particular dream is when I told you in the green room, I believed I was in Louisiana. So
Yeah.
I told you part of the dream. So I was in so in my world, I was in a resort in Louisiana, which I didn't know how they have resorts in Louisiana, but in my world they did. And
Sounds pretty good, really.
this particular resort had an interesting room service menu where you could order all sorts of things on the room service. My favorite thing to order was I could place an order and a young lady would come in, she'd spray raw cow's milk at my face. It would make me feel better.
Hey, you can't be held responsible for the dreams you have when you're in a coma, man.
So I kept hitting redial. I was like, bring me more of that raw cow's milk.
Right.
And at one point, they they came in on the speaker in the room and they said, Mr. Andrews, it's time for you to leave. I was like, I can't move. Now, in this context, I knew I was there convalescing. I knew I'd been sick and I knew I couldn't move. And I said, you're going to have to come in and get me. And they're like, you need to leave. And they started getting angrier and angrier and angrier. And they finally said, hey, if you don't leave, we're going to tell your wife about your room service. Because they had other things on that room service menu. And I was like, hey, you can tell her. She knows I like raw cow's milk. There's no secrets here. And at one point, I tried rolling out of the bed because I thought if I could roll out of the bed and I fall on the floor, at least somebody will have to come in and pick me up. And then I heard them mumbling in the background. And they said, let's get his wife. And that's when Karen came in. She put her left hand on my shoulder and said, Craig, this is Karen. I'm your wife. It's going to be okay. And so it turns out about that time, respiratory techs, usually young ladies, would come in the room and they would put me on nebulized albuterol.
Yeah.
So my brain just interpreted that as raw cow's milk, and it would make me feel better.
Yeah. It's all related. That's crazy.
But here's something else that's really interesting. My wife was in very, very few of my dreams. And like that dream ended when she came in and said, Craig, this is Karen. I'm your wife. It's going to be okay. That's the end of the dream. Well, I've been thinking about that. And one of the things, so let me get a little geeky here for a minute. Your brain is about 2 to 4% of your body mass, but it consumes 20 to 25% of your energy. Chess masters have been known to burn 6,000 calories during a chess match. And at this point, if you read my medical chart, I was diagnosed as clinically anorexic. And I mean, I was just kind of nothing. I was barely hanging on to life. And I realized this is what I believe happened is when Karen would show up, I'd know I was safe. And my brain said, okay, we're going to start shutting some things down to save some energy.
Hmm. Interesting. Wow, man. It's crazy the way the body acts when you're in that situation. And you were there for 6 weeks.
In the coma for 6 weeks, I was in the hospital for 3 months,
Oh, my goodness. And so all the while you have a marketing business.
which my team's running without me. They were awesome.
Well, now, how does that happen? I mean, you're the marketing business, right? I mean, you're the head of it. You're the face of it. How are they taking care of everything when you're indisposed?
I'll take this back to one of the early leadership lessons I had in the Marine Corps. I had this. So in the Marines, I was an avionics technician. We worked on a system that jammed radars. So when airplanes flew over, nothing happened, and that was success. Um, the I had this tech. We were on deployment, and I had this tech. Actually, I'd been transferred over to a bench that I hadn't been trained on because the bench wasn't working out, and my boss wanted to see if I could square it away. And one of the techs just wasn't performing. And, I'd try teaching him, I'd try all these different things, and nothing worked out. And finally, one day I just told him, I said, look, I'm done fixing gear on this bench. If any gear gets fixed, it's going to be because you fixed it. That may mean we have to work night, weekends and what have you, and I'll be here. But you've got to figure out how to fix gear. And so I said, I'll be here to answer questions. And it was a bumpy road at first, but he started figuring it out. And he actually became the best tech on the bench. There was another guy who thought he was hot stuff, and he was kind of so-so. And this guy became a way better tech than him. And so the lesson I learned was, there's a price to building a team, and you have to pay that price. And so fast forward to the years leading up to the coma, I had somebody who worked for me, and every now and then she would go tell the client something she shouldn't, maybe made a promise she shouldn't have or something. And I went to her and I said, "You have to go set this straight." She's like, "I don't want to." I'm like, "Well, you have to. You're the one that made the miscommunication. You have to set it straight." I said, "It's going to be okay. I'm going to coach you through it. It's going to be fine, but you have to do it." It was painful. I didn't enjoy doing that because she was obviously suffering. She didn't want to do that, and I don't like to see people suffer. But she did it, and by the way, she quit telling the clients things she shouldn't tell them. That was another benefit. But fast forward to August of 2021, she had to go have the hardest conversation she ever had with our clients. And she started calling up our clients and said, "Hey, I need to tell you, Craig's in the hospital with COVID. He's on the ventilator. He's in a coma. He's not going to make it." And she had to have that conversation with each of our clients. And during that time, we only lost one client.
Wow. That's a credit to your team in a huge way.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah. Yeah. And we had
Man.
freelancers. So I'm in a business that uses a lot of freelancers. Freelancers reached out to my team and said, "Hey, as long as Craig's in the hospital, we'll do whatever's necessary." It's, I was awake about 2 weeks before my wife started telling me about this, and I was just blown away. Just overwhelmed by what my team did.
You still have those people with you?
It's really sad. That one who basically ran the business, she left about 4 or 5 months after I got out of the hospital. And she was making the right choice for her. Her priorities in life had changed, and she wanted to do something different. And when I listened to what she wanted to do, I said, I can't offer that. I wish I could. And so I wished her well. I mean, she's great. I always want her to do well. It was a big loss, but what was funny was the person that had preceded her, um, somebody named Elena. When Elena had resigned, Elena gave me 3 months' notice, which was great. And so Elena was a part of the hiring process to bring on Libby, the person who ran the company when I was out. And Elena helped train Libby. And so I called up Elena and I said, "Hey, you want to come back?" And she's like, "Yeah." And she actually, I probably shouldn't say this, but she accepted the job offer before she knew what it paid. And which, I was really, really proud of. And so she's still with me and is just amazing.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So the company then, tell us about the company and what you do and what you offer and how you operate.
Yeah, so we're fractional CMOs plus plus tactics. A lot of our clients don't have the team to do the execution, but we always start with the strategy. We found that that's the most important thing. You can do, a lot of marketers are out pushing tactics, and tactics without strategy is just kind of noise. And any gains is just kind of short-lived. So the folks we work with, they tend to have a high ticket service, like 20K to 2 mil. They tend to have long sales cycles that require super high levels of trust to close. And and they tend to be in commoditized or crowded markets. Now, commoditized doesn't mean cheap, it just means there's a lot of people there. So, like financial advisors, offshore software development, folks like that.
Hmm.
And that's kind of our sweet spot because, the when I was marketing semiconductors for mobile phones, you had to build a ton of trust. So like Nokia, back in the day, Nokia was producing 1 million phones a day. Well, you imagine messing up their production line just a little bit.
Yeah.
Think about the ripple effects of messing up a production line that's pumping out 1 million phones every day.
Right.
And so, it took a lot of trust. And one of the products I launched in that industry was unlike anything anybody had ever made. It was different, which again, engineering is not a field that rewards creativity. It scares engineers. And so we were able to market that um, and help people build trust around that. And change the way people made cell phones. But getting the first half dozen wins was hard. Um, And so, I learned a lot about building trust and what's really interesting, and it doesn't matter whether it was chips for mobile phones or financial advisors or offshore software development or, you know, um, professional liability insurance for attorneys. What you have to tap into is people's deeper needs. People think I'm selling. Let me go back to, semiconductors for mobile phones. I think I'm selling semiconductors for mobile phones. I'm like, no, you're not. You're actually selling competency. If you want, and so anybody that sells to engineers, you want to know how to sell to engineers? Figure out how to make them better engineers because they work with you rather than someone else. If you sell that, you'll make these incredibly tight bonds that are just hard to break. And nobody will figure out what you're doing. You'll be doing it in plain sight. They're going to start copying you, but they're going to copy the wrong things. And so when we're working with folks today, one of our toughest sales jobs is getting our clients to agree to let us put things on their website that they'd rather not put there. But what we found, and this is based in science and psychology, an essential ingredient in building trust is you have to reveal a weakness, vulnerability, or flaw.
Okay.
And when you do it in a counterintuitive way, it just builds insane levels of trust. Now, you have to do it smartly. You don't want to go out there and just say, well, I suck, and let me tell you the ways I suck. You're not going to get a lot of business that way. But the very strategically revealed, weakness, vulnerability, or flaws, they humanize you. And you've seen this. You've seen this before, and you didn't, maybe you recognized it, maybe you didn't. Did you see the TV show House?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. So Gregory House, there's something called a character diamond, a brilliant diagnostician. That's the first thing you notice about him, is he's absolutely brilliant. Something else that you notice immediately is he's horrible with people. He just like
Right.
has world's worst people skills. Then his non-negotiable, the hill he will die on, is the unsolved problem. If you remember, there was one episode where he kept diagnosing somebody after they died because for him it was unacceptable to have the unsolved problem.
Okay.
And then the weakness, vulnerability, or flaw was he was a opioid addict. He's always popping those pills. And when you bring those things together, you create a really magnetic character. Now, let me let you in on a secret. When the folks pitched House to Hollywood, you can imagine Hollywood, um, they have all these people pitching ideas and they're like, why will this work? And they say, we've ripped off a proven formula and we're going to rip it off in a way that nobody notices. They're like, really? Well, what's the proven formula? It's Sherlock Holmes. He's a brilliant diagnostician. He's horrible with people. His non negotiable is the unsolved problem. His weakness, vulnerability, or flaw, they didn't even change the drug. He was a heroin addict.
Wow. I had no idea that was based on that.
Yeah, if you remember House's apartment, his little townhome or what have you, the address for that was the same as Sherlock Holmes.
Honestly, I never would have picked that out in a million years, but that's hilarious. Okay.
Well, that's the thing. He said we're going to rip it off and nobody's going to notice. So we do that all the time. We look for proven formulas. We just signed a client, and I wouldn't say too much about him here, but the as I look at him, the formula that I'm going to steal. You remember the TV show Home Improvement,
Oh yeah.
where you have Tim Taylor, the tool man, who's a little bit. He's a great guy, but he's a little bit goofy and
Right.
you know sometimes misdirected energy. And then you have Wilson, the face behind the fence. You never see Wilson's face.
Right.
So this client's a duo where there's one person that's told me, Craig, you're not going to get me on camera. I don't want to be on camera. I'm the person behind the scenes. Well, they're Wilson. When I sit there and talk to him, I'm like, we have Tim and we have Wilson. So when we're doing the marketing for him, that's what we're going to rip off. I don't have to know why Tool Time or whatever what was that, Home Improvement.
Yeah.
I don't have to know why it was successful. I know it was successful. For whatever reason, that was a proven formula that worked for many years. And so I can go steal it. And it just so happens that my clients have the character traits of Tim and Wilson.
Excellent. So this is what you incorporate in your business then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me give you another example from another TV show. This one's probably the best character diamond I've ever seen. Have you seen Breaking Bad?
Oh yeah.
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 Okay. Walter White,
Right.
brilliant chemist, one of the best in the world. Immediately obvious, right?
Right.
Here's where they got that character diamond so good is the opposite side of that contradicts the first. That's where you get the best, is where you create that tension. So, one of the best chemists in the world, what's he doing? He's teaching high school chemistry to a bunch of nose pickers that don't want to be there, making a
Right.
crappy salary. He should be a billionaire. His ex-partner is a billionaire.
Right.
So you see that tension. You have one of the best chemists in the world teaching high school chemistry.
Right.
His non-negotiable, family. He would do anything for family. Weakness, vulnerability, or flaw, it would be easy to say cancer, which it was, but that's not really the one. His weakness, vulnerability, or flaw was his ego.
Mm, I can see
Remember,
that. Yeah, for sure.
his ex-business partner said, "Hey, I'll pay for you. I'll pay
Right.
for you." He's like, "No." His ego wouldn't let him. When Hank feels like he finally has the great Heisenberg and he's dead, he's sitting at dinner and he's like, "Yeah, it's not Heisenberg. That's nothing more than a student." And, Walter's wife, Skylar's sitting there looking at him like, "Are you nuts? You got your DEA brother-in-law off your back and you're sitting there putting him back on the trail?"
Right. Because he didn't like the way it was described. Yeah, I remember that.
There's a form, there's a formula that creates magnetic characters that people are drawn to. And one of the essential elements is a weakness, vulnerability, or flaw. We all have them. We just have to be honest about them.
Interesting. Interesting. All right. So I was reading some of this that you're talking about right now. The how does your first time offer thing work with that then?
Well, so the first time offer doesn't tie into that
Oh, I
specifically.
see. All right.
So yeah. So usually we're setting the basis of the brand on the About Us page. And one of my hardest jobs is getting people to agree to let me put something on their website that, embarrasses them a little bit. And I've gotten better at, before we sign a client, I just tell them, hey, we're going to put something on your About Us page and you're going to hate it, but it's going to make you money. Don't sign up if you're not up for that. And they've gotten better. But we had a financial advisor that we put on their About Us page that he used to be a gambler. That was a hard sell, but we tripled their revenue in a year and a half. Um, our offshore software development client, we open up their About Us page saying a foreign bird with a local walk is an Indian phrase for a person who is out of place and has learned to adapt. Some use that phrase to describe me. My skin is dark and my name is a Syriac Malayan name that is common in South India. But I grew up in Dallas. Whether I'm walking in India or in Dallas, I'm a foreign bird. My life is a journey of discovering my local walk when everything else is out of place. It was so hard to get him to agree to put that on the website. He said, I don't want to be a foreign bird.
Right.
I said, do you want to make money? He said, yes. It's like, trust me here. So that sets the basis. But first time offers is a little bit of a different direction. We use them in unison. And let's think about courtship. You know, um, I know a guy in the Marine Corps who would go into bars and he'd walk up to strange women in bars and make an outlandish request. And he'd say, hey, everybody would say no except for one. And I'm like, okay. Now, you always had to question the character of the one who said yes. You know, what are you connecting into? But that's the way a lot of people do high ticket sales. They call up, hey, I got this offer. I know a managed service provider, your outsourced IT. They were trying to cold call their way into 3-year contracts valued at an average of $250,000 per contract. And like, you got to question the character of the business that would say yes to that. Just like you have to question the character of the girl that would say yes to my buddy's request in the bar. Because what it says is they're probably not real good at making business decisions. And is that who you want to link to? And so what we do in real life is when we have kind of 5 stages of courtship. You have an introduction, then you have conversation. If conversation goes well, you don't get married. You go out for coffee. And if you think about the coffee date, you're removing tons of risk. You show up in the middle of the day during daylight hours. You drive separately. There's no, there's no commitment risk. There's limited financial risk. Um, Women have told me that when they go on coffee dates, they'll have a girlfriend call them in about 15 or 20 minutes into the date to see if they need a rescue. So you have all these outs. But the only reason you go on a coffee date is because you hope for bigger and better things. You don't go on it because you think it's going to fail. Well, when it comes to doing high ticket sales, I'm like, why are you going for the 3-year, $250,000 commitment? Why don't you solve a smaller problem for somebody first?
Hmm.
And structure in a way that a qualified buyer would never say no. And so the element, and that's what a first time offer is, there's a few traits. It's a impulse purchase. That means coins in the cushion of the couch, money in the wallet, or the B2B equivalent of that. If somebody has to ask permission to spend that money, then it's priced too high. If anybody will ever be held accountable for how the money is spent, it's priced too high. Next requirement is it has to have disproportionate value to price. If they need to pause for even a second to figure out if it's a good value, you're not delivering enough value. It has to be overwhelming value. The next thing, and this is so important, people read my book, put together offers, and they skip this. And I'm like, this is a non-negotiable. You have to solve a problem. Turns out when you solve a problem in somebody's life, it causes a release of oxytocin in the body. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone that bonds baby to mother. And when you solve a problem in somebody's life, it bonds them to you. Now, people will say, hey, we're doing an audit. I'm like, that doesn't solve a problem. That just highlights the problems that are there. Other people say we do an assessment. I'm like, assessment's just a really nice word for an audit. It has to solve a problem. Now, if you do an audit, that's fine, but you need to pair it with a solution. You have to solve problems in people's lives. You want to leave the big problems unsolved because if you solve all their problems, they'll never buy your core offer. And this thing's priced at a level you'll never, put food on the table. And you want it to naturally lead to the next step. We found that for complex services such as managed service providers or offshore software development or you name it, there should be a minimum of four and a maximum of five deliverables. And those four or five deliverables should move them four or five steps closer from where they are to where they want to be.
Hmm. Interesting. Dang, man. I mean, that's a marketing lesson and a half. I haven't
Yeah.
thought of half that stuff. That's amazing.
Well, I learned it trial and error over 18 months before I closed my first deal with one of these offers. And even that
Nice.
wasn't structured. I mean, you're looking at over a half decade of refining and learning and making it better.
That's incredible. So I'm curious because I've listened to the podcast and I'm trying to figure out how does the podcast then play in with the business or does it? How do you utilize that?
The podcast, the motivation for that was really about celebrating leaders. When my wife started telling me, 2 weeks awake from my coma, my wife starts telling me about what my team had done. It to this day it gets me choked up. I'm just bowled over by what they did.
Yeah.
I consider that my biggest accomplishment in business. And I mean, in semiconductor world, I drove over a half billion in revenue, but I feel like this was a bigger achievement. And so part of what I wanted to do is, there's a lot of business owners out there that are making impacts on people's lives. And I just want to celebrate them. And I want them to be encouraged. And I want them to share their wisdom with other business owners. And so that's kind of the thought behind the podcast. Now, I do birds of a feather. I invite on guests that, kind of fit into a little tribe that resembles, the people I hang out with. And so it's a great opportunity to network.
There you go. Okay. Yeah, I can
And
see that.
I'll tell you something I do. Um, Once we're done recording, and I look at them and I ask them, I say, if you could snap your fingers and make one change to your business that would change the trajectory of your business, what would that one thing be? About one out of three times, it turns out it's a problem I can solve, but two out of three times, it's a problem I can't solve, but I know somebody who can. And it's
Nice.
become my number one way of doing referrals. And it's so gratifying to
That's
be
great.
help make those connections for people.
Yeah. I mean, that's great. That's a great way to use the podcast. So, and now it makes sense to me too, with what I heard and, with the interviews that I got to listen to and that kind of thing. That makes a lot more sense. You're building your own network through that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Very nice.
and I mean, there's an amazing world of people that we've never met. I mean, so I'll tell you one podcast guest I almost rejected because he didn't meet my ideal guest profile. Guy named John Hewitt, founder of Jackson Hewitt Tax Services,
Oh, wow. Okay.
and the board fired him from Jackson Hewitt, and he went off and started Liberty Tax Services. The Statue of Liberty with the little spinner sign. The guy made the only two national competitors to H&R Block, and for a few seconds I was about to reject him. I was like, because he didn't fit my ideal guest profile. I'm like, Craig, you're an idiot. Invite this guy on your podcast. you're going to learn something. And I think and I did. He was an amazing guest. And I think that's one of the things I love about the podcast is it's an opportunity for me to learn from others, um, just how they solve problems, things that they do. And it's been amazing the people that I've met and the things I've learned through the process.
That's awesome. One of the questions I always try and fit in is my corny question with everybody. And you may have just answered part of it, so you might be halfway done, brother. But when it comes to your podcast, what is it about doing your podcast itself that you love the most? And then what is it about doing the podcast that you really hate the most?
I think the love the most is um, just meeting people, meeting diversity of people. Um, we had a guest come on recently. The episode isn't live yet, but I didn't have any. I had people ask me. I want to write a book. Do you know anybody who can help me? And I did have an answer to that question. And now I don't. And so Elena, who manages my bookings, asked me about this. I'm like, no, I want to have them there because I don't have anybody I can refer. I don't have any publishers I can refer people to. So I think I love that, and I really love just hearing how different people solve problems in business. The thing I hate the most, and it's not bad. It's kind of the nuts and bolts of production. Yeah, the now thankfully I'm doing it in the age of AI, and AI makes production so much easier. If I was doing this 5 years ago, it'd be a lot more work.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I love your answers for sure. You always get good ones to that question, but that's a great lead into is how do you utilize AI in the podcast? What pieces of that do you use, and how does it work for you?
Yeah. So I wrote a GPT, and let me just throw this out for anybody that's scared of AI. If you can have a conversation with somebody, you can work in the world of AI. It's very conversational. And so GPT is basically a pre-programmed, pre-packaged program where you give instructions. And again, there's a couple formatting things. Here's a trick. Go into ChatGPT and say, how do I write a GPT that will do this? And guess what? It will write your GPT for you. And all you have to do is copy it in there. If you're not using GPTs, if you're not writing GPTs, you're missing out. I don't care what you're doing. You should have at least a half dozen GPTs that you use on a regular basis. And so I have a GPT that I feed it a transcript. Um, yeah, and I still do all my own production. It doesn't take me that long to produce an episode with this, but I'll pull it into Premiere Pro and I'll get the a transcript out of that. In Premiere Pro, you can empty all the filler words, dump all the ahs, ums, and what have you.
Right.
And I feed the transcript into my GPT, and I tell it the guest website URL, the guest LinkedIn URL. It gives me 5 recommended titles. It writes my show notes and it gives me a bullet list of key points with timestamps.
That's very helpful. I would
Yeah,
imagine. Yeah. All right.
yeah, and that's done in just seconds. And so then it's just a matter of having Premiere Pro, spool out the audio file and then spool out the video file.
Great. I like that. Since your podcast is not actually part of the marketing business, as a marketer, do you promote the podcast, or do you just rely on kind of word of mouth and guesting and things like that to promote the actual podcast itself?
Yeah, we mostly just promote the podcast. Or I mean, we mostly just rely on word of mouth. If there's somebody I want to talk to, it's a great way. Um, yeah, hey, can you come on my podcast and tell me what you want? Tell me what you do.
Right.
So it's a great way of making introductions. Um, the I know people that get all proud of, hey, I'm booked out for the rest of next year. It's going to take 12 months to get on my podcast. And for a while, we were up to like 3 or 4 months to get booked, and then another 2, 3 months, 3 months before the episode would go live. And I realized that's not a great experience for my guest. They come on my podcast and then they have to wait nearly, from the day they decide to come on my podcast, they have to wait nearly a year for their episode to come out.
Yeah.
I was like, that's not a great experience. And so I just started making some changes to, being a lot more selective in the guests. Um, Now, for those that track it, according to Listen Notes, we're a top 3% podcast, so that makes it easy. For those that pay attention, that makes it easy to book guests.
Right. That's
Um,
excellent.
we have a bunch of reviews. I forget, we're up around 70 reviews, I think. And there are people that look at that. I have one guest who told me he won't do a podcast that has less than 50 reviews.
Hmm. All right. I mean,
So,
you got to have your standards, so I understand.
yeah. And so it's funny. There was somebody, one of the areas I've focused, and this is just part of the platform I have. There's people that are going in and changing the way healthcare is delivered. In a world where healthcare is going up double digit year on year, these guys are actually delivering better healthcare at with a downward slope in price.
Hmm.
And so I've been inviting a bunch of those people. I have one that interviewed this morning. Their episode will be going live in about a month, and they're going in. They're doing good things. They're fixing a lot of the brokenness in that system. Well, it's funny. There was somebody I wanted to have on that runs a pharmacy benefit manager, which that's um, the short answer is PBMs or pharmacy benefit managers are the reason your drugs are insanely expensive. There's so much corruption in that.
Hmm.
And there was somebody I invited on, um, and they just started getting squirrely. And I was like, look, here's the bottom line. It's a top 3% podcast. If you want to get your message out on my podcast, apply. If you don't. You know,
Right. That's good when you hit that level of accomplishment and you can kind of be like, hey man, if you don't want to be here, it's okay.
yeah.
That's great. That is great. I love that. I really do. Craig, you've got a heck of a story, man. You really do. And your business sounds fascinating. I love the first time offer idea. And I learned more about marketing, honestly, I think in the last 45 minutes than I have in at least the last 5 years. So I
Wow.
I appreciate all that. I never even equated your business to all that you were talking about with the TV show. I'm going to re-listen to this when it's over and take much better notes. I hope everybody else does too, who's listening to this. So thank you for bringing all that today, because that was really fascinating stuff. I really have enjoyed that. As we kind
Yeah.
of, pull this together and wrap things up, let me just ask you, in terms of podcasting, what's your best piece of advice for folks who are like not quite where you are in their podcasting journey? And they can't yet say, "Hey, if you don't want to be here, don't be here." Maybe they need every guest, that type of thing. But what's your best piece of advice for them, man?
I would say figure out how to get your guests in conversation mode. There's so many times I hit record and I'm like, what happened to the person in the green room? I want to talk to them. And I think I had a buddy on who's a regular speaker on stages. And I told him, I said, hey, look, Brian, this isn't a stage. This is just a conversation. But as soon as we hit record, he went into stage mode. And so my piece of advice would be one, get very comfortable with being conversational. You know, just have a conversation like you would with anybody that you're curious about. And then two, before you hit record, just stress, educate your guest um, about keeping it conversational. And um, because I think I think that's the essence of the podcast medium. I think that's the appeal. I think people appreciate the authenticity. Kind of like revealing the weakness, vulnerability, or flaw. It humanizes somebody.
Yeah,
When you're conversational, you come across a lot more human.
great. I love that personally. I mean, I try to keep that as my style. So I think it's great advice for people. Thank you for that. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Craig, thank you, man. I appreciate you coming on, telling your story, talking about your podcast, and giving all the advice you gave. If somebody did not get something from this podcast, they missed it, and you got to listen to it again, folks. So definitely appreciate you coming on. Host of Leaders and Legacies podcast, Craig Andrews. Sir, thank you so much. It was great meeting you today.
Rory, it's been a delight. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot. Folks, it's been another fantastic episode of the Podcaster Nation. The reason that we have these great guests, these great podcasters come on here is because this is the podcast that's about podcasters, it's for podcasters, and it's done by podcasters. Folks, this is the place where the rising tide truly raises all ships, so keep sailing.